We have
She
to
wore
leave.
steel-toed
Now.
boots to work,
Why?
They're coming
collected
for
garbage
us.
before the
Mommy,
sun
I'm
came up,
scared.
He's right,
and
we need
came
to go.
home every night to a house the city had already scheduled to tear down. He wore tailored suits, ran a company worth $800 million, and had not slept a full night in 5 years. Neither of them knew the other was still in the same city. Neither of them knew how close they were. Not yet. Zora had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because an alarm went off. She had stopped setting alarms after the first week. Her body had learned the route the way bodies learn things they are made to repeat. It woke itself up, swung its own legs over the edge of the bed, and put its own feet on the cold hardwood floor. She dressed in the dark. Work pants, long-sleeved shirt, thick socks. She sat on the edge of the bed and laced up her boots, heavy, steel-toed, mud-caked from yesterday, and she did it without thinking. One laced, then the other. The way her mother had taught her to do hard things. One step at a time, not the whole thing, just the next step. She was 18 years old. Before she pulled on her vest, she went to the kitchen and ate 4 crackers with peanut butter standing at the counter. That was breakfast. That was most mornings. The peanut butter was almost gone. She would need another jar by Thursday, which meant managing the envelope carefully this week. The envelope lived in the bottom of her boot bag, whatever was left after the power bill and the water bill she had been paying under the previous account number. The one she still remembered from childhood. The one she had given the tired man on the phone when she first moved in, and he had restored the power without asking a single question she could not answer. She had been afraid he would ask questions. He had not. She ate the 4 crackers. She drank water from the tap. She pulled on her orange vest and picked up her gloves from the desk. Her hands, even gloved, still carried a smell at the end of shift that no amount of washing fully removed. Something metallic and organic and specific to the work. She had gotten used to it. You got used to most things if they were the price of staying. Then she stopped. On the windowsill, the bracelet was catching the first gray light of morning the way it always did. Thin. A single word engraved in French. She did not wear it to work. She left it on the windowsill where she could see it every morning when she woke up and every evening when she came home. A compass point. The one object she owned that said, "You came from somewhere. You were someone's daughter." That is still true. She went downstairs and walked out into the dark. Her route that morning took her through the central business district. She moved fast the way you move when your body knows the work before your mind does. Bins outside restaurants. Loading docks behind office towers. The glass buildings along the waterfront just beginning to catch the early light. She was on her 3rd block when she stopped. A building on the corner. 14 floors, glass and steel. And above the entrance, in brushed metal letters she had now passed 3 times on this route without being able to simply pass, Terrad Energy Group. Her father's name. On the side of a building. $800 million of everything he had built while she was gone. While she was in Canada eating dinner in a small house outside Toronto, pretending to be someone the world did not know existed. While she was learning to answer to a different name. While she was sitting beside her mother's hospital bed in the last 3 months, watching a woman get smaller and quieter until one morning she did not open her eyes. She had come back to the city with nothing. No money. No plan. No documentation. She had come back because when her mother died and she stood in that small house asking herself, where do you go when the last person who knew you were alive is gone, the answer was not complicated. It was just a street. A white house on a street in the city, with a porch swing and a creak on the 3rd stair. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at his name. Without deciding to, her hand moved to the front pocket of her vest, where the bracelet was not, because she never brought it to work, because it stayed on the windowsill, and found nothing. Her hand came back empty. She stood there for 8 seconds. She thought about the 14 floors. The glass. The brushed metal letters. The man somewhere inside that building who had stood at a graveside with her name on it and had not known he was grieving something still alive. She did not step toward the building. She picked up the next bag and kept moving. That particular Tuesday in October, Carver Terrad was in the back of his car being driven across the city for a reason he had been telling himself was practical. His project manager, a man named Dale, had left 3 messages about the Audubon Street property. The demolition company needed final confirmation before they moved the crew. The buyers for the commercial development were getting impatient. Everything was ready to proceed. He just needed to walk the property one last time, sign the authorization, and let 5 years of a locked door become a gas station. It was good business. Smart business. That was what he had been telling himself for 3 weeks since he signed the initial demolition papers. Lizette had agreed with him, had encouraged him actually, in that quiet, measured way she had. She said it was time. She said holding on to the past was not healthy. She said turning the property into something productive was exactly the kind of forward thinking that had made him successful. She had said all of this at dinner one evening while Gordon ate his food beside her, and Carver had nodded and thought yes, you are right, and had called Dale the following morning. He looked out the window as the city changed around him. The central business district gave way to the garden district, then further into older neighborhoods where the houses were smaller and the live oaks stretched their arms over the streets like they owned them. A woman swept her front porch. 2 boys argued over a bicycle on the sidewalk. A man carried groceries in plastic bags that cut into his fingers, life moving in its ordinary way, indifferent to whatever any individual person was carrying inside them. Carver's driver, Jones, said nothing. He had worked for Carver for 4 years and he was good at silence. They turned onto Audubon Street. Carver felt his hands go cold before his mind caught up with why. He knew the street. He knew the way the houses sat slightly back from the sidewalk here, the way the trees arched overhead, the way the light came through in the afternoon in long golden pieces. He had driven through this neighborhood 1,000 times when Zora was small. He knew every block. He had just not been here in 5 years, because the version of himself that could handle being here had not existed in 5 years. The car slowed. There was. He had not prepared himself adequately for what it would do to him, seeing it again. The house was white, or had been white, though the paint had gone to a tired gray at the edges where the weather had worked on it for years. The garden along the front fence had grown wild, the way things grow when no one is tending them, full of the determined chaos of plants that answered to nothing. The porch swing was still there, one chain slightly lower than the other, the way it had always been. He had always meant to fix that. He had always meant to fix a lot of things. Jones put the car in park. Carver sat. He was aware of being unable to move. This was not a feeling he was accustomed to. He was a man who made decisions in seconds and acted on them without hesitation. He did not sit in the back of cars unable to move. And yet here he was. A specific memory arrived without asking permission. Zora at 11 years old, sitting on that porch swing on a Saturday afternoon with a book open in her lap. Her feet not quite reaching the ground. The white streak in her hair bright in the afternoon sun. She had been humming something he could not identify. He had watched her from the front walk for almost a full minute before she heard him and looked up and smiled. It was not a dramatic memory. It was not the kind of memory you would tell someone about. But it was the one that lived closest to the surface. The one that had been with him every morning for 5 years when he opened his eyes and remembered what was gone. He got out of the car. The air smelled like October in New Orleans, which is its own specific thing. Warm still, but with the first suggestion of something cooler underneath. The city exhaling after the long, brutal summer. He stood on the sidewalk looking at the house for a moment. Then he walked toward it. The front gate opened with the same creak it had always had. He stopped. The weeds along the front path had been pressed down. Not overgrown in the undisturbed way everything else was overgrown. Pressed down repeatedly, in a narrow line from the gate to the porch steps. Like someone had been walking this path regularly. Recently. He frowned. Probably kids cutting through the yard. Probably nothing. He told himself this, believed it partially, and walked to the front door. The key was in his inside jacket pocket. He had not put it on his keyring in 5 years. He kept it separate, in a small envelope in his desk drawer. He had taken it out this morning and put it in his pocket and told himself it was just in case. He was just being practical. The lock turned. The door swung open. He reached for the light switch out of pure muscle memory. He had cut the electricity off years ago. His hand moved to the switch anyway and flipped it. The light came on. Carver went very still. The electricity was not supposed to be on. He looked at the switch. He looked at the ceiling fixture. The light was on. Someone had restored the electricity to this house. He stood in the doorway and looked at the front room. Everything was as he had left it 5 years ago. The furniture, the bookshelves, the framed photographs on the walls. But with something layered over the stillness. The specific quality of air in a space that is being lived in. A blanket on the armchair that had not been there before. Worn soft from use, folded with care. A pair of running shoes by the door. Small, a woman's size, with red mud on the soles that was still slightly damp. He moved slowly into the house. In the kitchen, 2 dishes sat drying in the rack beside the sink. 1 plate, 1 glass. On the counter near the window, 3 things arranged in a neat line. A box of crackers. A jar of peanut butter. A small cup that held 2 spoons. He stood looking at those 2 spoons for a long time without fully understanding why they were affecting him the way they were. He moved to the hallway. Near the base of the stairs, there was a pair of heavy work boots. The kind with steel reinforcement in the toe. They were scuffed and mud-caked at the sole, and they were small, much too small for a man. The right size for a young woman. On the floor beside them, neatly folded, was a reflective orange vest. The kind worn by sanitation crews. He understood then that this was not kids cutting through the yard. Someone was living here. He stood at the base of the stairs and looked up. The house was quiet. Whoever was here was not here now. He thought about calling out and did not. He thought about leaving and could not. Some pull he could not name was drawing him up those stairs, and he had stopped fighting pulls he could not name somewhere around year 3 of the grief, when he ran out of energy for resistance. He climbed the stairs. The landing. The hallway. 3 doors. The first door, the small bedroom at the end of the hall, stood open. He could see from where he stood that it was empty. Undisturbed. The second door, the bathroom, was slightly ajar. Nothing unusual. The third door. Zora's bedroom. He had not been able to think about this door directly in 5 years. He had approached it in his mind 1,000 times and turned away every time, because whatever was on the other side of it in his imagination was too much. Too many mornings. Too many homework battles and too many goodnight conversations and too many moments of ordinary fatherhood that he had not known were the best moments of his life until they were over. The door was not fully closed. A sliver of light at the edge. He pushed it open. The room was not empty. Someone had been living in it. The bed was made, not carelessly, but with deliberate neatness. The blanket smooth and tight at the corners. On the small desk sat a notebook, closed, and a pen. A jacket hung on the back of the chair, dark blue, worn at the elbows. On the wall beside the window, 3 photographs had been pinned up. Small, printed on regular paper. He moved closer to look at them. The first photograph was of a woman he recognized, even after years, even in age. Celestine. She was standing in front of a house he did not know, somewhere in what looked like winter, snow on the ground. She was smiling at whoever was holding the camera. She looked older than he remembered her. Quieter. But she was smiling. The second photograph was of an elderly woman he did not recognize. Dark-skinned, white-haired, small and upright in the way of people who have spent a lifetime carrying themselves with dignity. She was sitting on a porch somewhere, and she was looking at the camera with an expression he could not fully read, but that contained something like peace. The third photograph was of no one. It was a picture of this house. This exact house. Taken from the front walk in the daytime, the porch swing visible, the overgrown garden, the tired paint. Someone had stood on the sidewalk of this street and taken a photograph of this house and pinned it to the wall of this room like a compass point. Like a destination. He turned from the photographs. On the windowsill, catching the October light, was a bracelet. Carver Tarrant had not cried in 5 years. He had decided at some point in the first year after the funeral that he was finished with crying, not out of strength, but out of necessity. He had a company to run. He had people whose livelihoods depended on him. He had a wife and a son and a life that required him to be present and functional and forward-facing. And so he had put crying away the way you put away things you cannot afford to keep accessible. He was not able to keep it away now. He reached for the back of the desk chair. His legs had made a unilateral decision about their continued reliability, and he needed something to hold. The bracelet was gold, thin, with a small engraved panel on the top face. The engraving was a single word in French, the Tarot family word, passed from his grandmother to his mother to him, and from him to exactly one person in this world. He had clasped it on a tiny wrist in a hospital room on a morning he remembered with a clarity that no amount of grief had been able to erode. He was still holding the back of the chair when he heard the front door open downstairs. He did not move. Footsteps on the hardwood below. Moving through the kitchen, the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing. Then the footsteps at the bottom of the stairs, moving upward slowly, with the specific exhaustion in each step of someone who has been on their feet since before the sun came up. The footsteps reached the landing, turned toward the bedroom, stopped. He was standing in the doorway. She was standing in the hallway. And for a moment that contained several lifetimes, neither of them moved. He saw the white streak first. It was above her left ear, the same position as his, the same width, the same bright contrast against dark hair. It was genetic and unmistakable and impossible to be anything other than what it was. His mother had it. He had it. And now it was standing in the hallway of his daughter's old bedroom, on the face of a young woman he did not know and absolutely knew simultaneously. Then he saw her face. And Carver Tarot, who had run a company worth $800 million and had not broken in 5 years of grief and had told himself on the drive over that this was just a practical errand, a business decision, a forward-thinking move, Carver Tarot completely came apart. He said her name. That was all. Just her name. Zora. In a voice that did not belong to a CEO or a billionaire or a man in a pressed suit. In a voice that belonged to a father who had been standing at the edge of an impossible loss for 5 years and had just been pulled back from it without any warning at all. Zora did not move. She stood in the hallway in her work clothes, orange vest over a dark shirt, her hair pulled back except for the streak, and she looked at him with an expression he could not read. It was not the expression he would have imagined in the 1,000 times he had allowed himself the dangerous luxury of imagining this moment. It was not relief. It was not the collapse of a child running to her father. It was careful, watchful, the expression of someone who had learned that trust was a door you did not open for anyone until you knew with certainty what was standing on the other side. She was 18 years old and she had survived alone. And survival had made her careful in ways he did not yet understand but was beginning to. The silence between them lasted longer than any silence should. Then she said, quietly and without drama, "I did not think you would come back to this house." He said, "How?" Just that word. His voice barely working. She said, "I will explain everything. But first I need you to answer something." He waited. "I need to know if you knew," she said. "If you knew what happened to me and let it happen anyway." The question landed on him with full weight and he understood immediately what she was asking and what the answer meant to her. She was not asking out of accusation. She was asking because she had spent 5 years not knowing, and because the answer to this question determined everything that happened next between them. Whether he was safe. Whether this door was worth opening. He told her the truth. He told her he had been told she died. He told her about the funeral. The closed casket. The specific devastation of standing at a grave with your daughter's name on it and having no reason to question it, because the people telling you it was true were the people you trusted most. He told her about the 5 years after, not to defend himself or to solicit sympathy, because she had asked him for the truth and she deserved it without any decoration. She listened. She watched his face while he spoke, and he understood that she was reading him. She was not simply hearing his words. She was measuring them against something, against the question she had been carrying, he realized. The question of who he was when nobody was performing for him. When he finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "My mother died 3 months ago. In Canada. I did not know where else to go." He heard the word mother and something moved through him. He asked about Celestine. His voice was different now, softer, carrying something he had never let himself carry before, because carrying it would have meant admitting things about choices he had made and their consequences. Zora told him Celestine had died in October. Quietly, in a small house outside Toronto. She had been sick for 2 years and had not told Zora how sick until near the end. He sat down on the floor. Not on the bed. Not on the chair. The floor. Because his legs had decided they were finished and the floor was what was available. He sat there in his suit on the floor of his daughter's old bedroom and he did not perform anything. He just sat with it. Zora looked at him on the floor. Her expression changed, not softening exactly, but more like recalibration. She had expected something else perhaps. Some management of the moment. Some performance of composure. She had not expected the floor. She came and sat across from him. Not close. Not yet. The distance between them was not hostility. It was the appropriate caution of someone who had survived by measuring distances carefully. He did not try to close the distance. He did not reach for words or explanations or anything that would have made this easier on himself. He just sat there in his expensive suit with his hands open on his knees and said nothing. He was not managing the moment. He did not know how to manage this particular moment. That was visible on his face in a way he could not have hidden even if he had tried. She watched him not trying. Then she held out her wrist. The bracelet caught the light. He reached toward it without deciding to. His hand moved on its own, the way hands move toward things they recognize. He stopped just before touching it. He looked up at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of a man performing grief. They were the eyes of a man who had been performing everything else for 5 years and had just run out of the ability to do it. She nodded. He touched the bracelet. His hands remembered it before his mind caught up. The weight of it. The specific temperature of the metal. He had clasped this bracelet on a wrist so small it barely seemed real, in a hospital room on a morning 18 years ago when everything in the world was possible and he had not yet made the choices that would reduce it. He remembered the way she had grabbed his finger without opening her eyes. He had not cried in 5 years. He was wrong about being finished with crying. They sat together on the floor of the room for a long time without speaking. Outside, New Orleans went about its afternoon. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower. Somewhere further, music. The world completely indifferent to the specific private earthquake happening inside this one room. Finally, he asked her to tell him what happened. She told him some of it. She told him that someone in his household had found out about a plan to hurt her. She told him that this person had risked everything to save her. She told him she had been taken to her mother in Canada. She told him about 5 years in a small house outside Toronto, going to school under a different name, learning to be someone the world did not know existed. She did not tell him who saved her. Not yet. She was still deciding how much to give him, and he understood this on some level and did not push. He asked her one question, not about the details, not about who or what or why. Just one question. He asked her what she needed. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist. Then she looked at him. This man who had been a shape in her imagination for 5 years. A presence she had measured and evaluated from a distance. A father she had watched from across streets and parking lots, trying to determine whether he was worth the risk of being found. "I need to know if you are going to choose the truth when it comes out," she said. "Even if it costs you everything." He asked her what she meant. "When you find out who did this to me," she said, "it is going to break something in your life. Something you built. I need to know before that happens whether you are the kind of man who does the right thing when the right thing is expensive." He looked at his daughter. He looked at the white streak in her hair and the bracelet on her wrist and the careful watchfulness in her eyes that had not been there when she was 13, and that he understood was the cost of 5 years of surviving alone. He said, "Tell me everything." And she did. She started with Miss Cleo Marble. She said the name quietly and without fanfare, and he did not recognize it immediately, and then he did. An elderly woman. Small and upright and white-haired and dignified in the specific way of people who have never had much and have always kept their dignity anyway. She had worked in his household for 4 years. She had come to him through an agency and she had been quiet and capable and present in the way good household staff are present, reliably, invisibly, without demanding acknowledgement for the specific miracle of showing up every day and doing the work. He had not thought about Miss Cleo Marble in 5 years. He thought about her now. Zora told him what Miss Cleo Marble had been before she came to work in his house. A midwife. 31 years in a hospital on the east side of New Orleans. Delivering babies and keeping people alive and carrying the specific knowledge of the human body that comes only from decades of working at the exact boundary between life and death. She had retired from the hospital and become a household maid because she needed work and it was available, and she was not the kind of woman who sat still. Then Zora told him the rest of it. She told him about Lizette finding the will in his wardrobe and doing the arithmetic, seeing the 95% allocation, being pregnant with Gordon, making a calculation so cold it made Zora's chest tighten any time she thought about it. She told him about Lizette giving Miss Cleo Marble the substance and telling her to put it in Zora's food. She told him that Miss Cleo Marble had switched it, had replaced whatever Lizette gave her with something harmless, had said nothing, had given nothing away, and had gone about her work as if she had been asked to do nothing more extraordinary than clean a kitchen. And then she had begun to plan. Zora told him about Miss Cleo Marble using her retired midwife's knowledge to simulate the symptoms of death in a young girl. Slowed breathing. Weak pulse. Specific and convincing and enough to satisfy the doctor who had been paid to certify what Lizette needed certified. She told him about a retired doctor from Miss Cleo Marble's former hospital. About a phone call made in secret. About an agreement reached between two old people who had spent their professional lives deciding that every life was worth the effort of saving. She told him about the night they removed her from the mortuary before the burial and the specific terrifying silence of that drive. The girl barely conscious. The old woman holding her hand and telling her she was going to be all right. She told him about being taken to the airport. About Miss Cleo Marble pressing an envelope into her hand, everything she had saved, which was not much but was everything, and telling her that her mother was waiting, and that she was going to be safe, and that she should not come back until she was old enough to protect herself. She told him that Miss Cleo Marble had then returned to his house and cooked breakfast the following morning. Had served Lizette coffee and eggs and said nothing. Had attended the funeral. Had stood at the graveside with the rest of the household staff and mourned publicly the death she had privately prevented. And she had continued to work in that house for 2 more years before her health declined and she retired, and she had died without telling anyone. Without a thank you or a recognition or a single acknowledgement that she had done one of the most extraordinary things one human being can do for another. She had saved a child's life at the cost of everything, and she had never asked for anything in return. Carver had not spoken for a long time. When Zora finished, he was looking at the window, at the October light coming through, at the small photograph of an elderly white-haired woman sitting on a porch with an expression that contained something like peace. He said her name. Just that. Miss Cleo Marble. In the way you say the name of someone who deserved more than the world gave them. The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. Then he said, "Who gave her the substance?" Zora looked at him. She had been waiting for this question. She had been watching him since she came up those stairs, measuring him against the question of who he was when the performance was stripped away. She had watched him sit on the floor. She had watched him touch the bracelet with hands that remembered. She had watched him listen to Miss Cleo Marble's story without flinching or deflecting or reaching for comfort. She had made her decision. "It was Lizette," she said. He did not explode. He did not deny it. He did not reach for the comfortable alternatives. "Surely you are mistaken. Surely there is another explanation. Surely the woman I have been sleeping beside for 6 years did not look me in the face every day knowing my daughter was alive." He sat with it. She watched him process the arithmetic of it. Lizette finding the will. Lizette seeing the 95% allocation. Lizette being pregnant with Gordon. Lizette handing an elderly woman a substance intended to kill a child. Lizette holding his hand at the graveside of the empty coffin. Lizette, 6 years of dinners and conversations and bed and business decisions and the raising of a son together. All of it built on top of a thing she had done and never confessed and never would have confessed if this morning had not happened. He asked Zora one question. Quite specific. He asked her if she was certain. She told him what Miss Cleo Marble had told her, the specific details that left no room. The substance and the switch and the coordination with the doctor and the specific words Lizette had used when she gave Miss Cleo Marble the instructions. Details that could not be invented. Details that only someone who had been there could know. He nodded once. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. Dale. His project manager. He answered it because something told him to. Dale said, "Mr. Tarrant, I've been trying to reach you. I wanted to confirm. The demolition crew is scheduled for tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. Miss Lizette called this morning and said you wanted to move the date up. She said you wanted it done before the end of the week. We've got the crew confirmed. Everything is ready to go. Just wanted to make sure you're still good to proceed." Carver went completely still. He looked at Zora. She had heard. He thought about the house. This house. The one she had come back to with nothing, no money, no plan, no documentation. Because when her mother died and she stood in a small house in Canada asking herself, where do you go when the last person who knew you were alive is gone, the answer was just a street. This street. This porch swing, this creak on the third stair. He thought about Lizette calling Dale that morning. Lizette, who had attended the breakfast table across from him this morning with her coffee and her measured voice and her particular talent for appearing calm. Lizette, who knew Zora was back, or suspected it or feared it, and had made a phone call to a project manager while Carver was in the back of a car telling himself this was just a practical errand. She was trying to remove the last place Zora had to come back to. He said to Dale, "Cancel it." Dale paused. "Cancel all of it? The whole demolition?" "All of it. Indefinitely. Tell the buyers the property is no longer available for commercial development. Refund their deposit." A longer pause. "Mr. Tarrant, the contracts, the penalties alone are going to be significant," Miss Lizette said. "Dale." His voice was very quiet and very clear. "Cancel it." He ended the call. The room was silent. October light came through the window and fell across the floor between them. Somewhere outside, the lawn mower had stopped. The music down the street had changed. Zora was looking at him with the expression he was beginning to understand was the closest she came, right now, to trust. Not warmth. Not relief. Something more careful than that. Something that had been measured and tested and was not yet fully formed, but was not closed either. He was not going to rush it. He understood, sitting on the floor of this room, that whatever came next between them was going to take a long time and was going to require him to be honest in ways he had been systematically avoiding for years. About the choices that had created the conditions for this to happen. About the people he had trusted and the people he had failed to see clearly. About the difference between the life he had built and the life he had actually been living. He was not going to rush any of it. He said, "You can stay here. This house is yours. It has always been yours." She looked at the bracelet on her wrist. The gold thin against her dark skin, the engraved word catching the light. "There are things that are going to happen," she said. "When the truth comes out. I know. People in your life are going to learn things about each other and about themselves that they cannot unlearn. I know that too." "Gordon doesn't know," she said. "He's 6 years old. Whatever she did, he is still your son and he doesn't know any of it." He looked at his daughter, at the careful, specific way she had just offered that, not as a demand but as a fact she thought he needed to hold, and understood that the years alone had not hardened her the way hardness usually works. She had not come back wanting to destroy anything. She had come back because she had nowhere else to go, and because the answer to the question of where you go when you are the last person who knows you are alive was just a street, just a house, just a window with a bracelet on the sill. "I know," he said. She nodded once. Then she reached into her vest pocket and put something on the floor between them. A key. Plain metal, worn smooth at the edges from being carried for months without a keyring. "I had a copy made," she said, "the week I moved back in. I didn't know if you would come, or when, or what would happen if you did. But I kept paying the water bill under the old account number and I kept the key and I kept the bracelet on the window where I could see it." He looked at the key on the floor between them. "One step at a time," she said. "Not the whole thing. Just the next step." He recognized it. The way her mother had taught her to do hard things. The same way, in different words, someone had once tried to teach him and he had not been patient enough to learn. He picked up the key. Outside, New Orleans continued its October afternoon, ordinary, indifferent, completely unaware that in a small upstairs room in a house on Audubon Street, A father and a daughter were sitting on the floor in the particular silence of people who have a great deal to say to each other and have just agreed, without saying it, to take the time to say it properly. The bracelet was on her wrist where it belonged. The key was in his hand. The house was still standing. That was enough for today. The rest would come. One step at a time. Not the whole thing. Just the next step. If this story reached something in you, if you have ever had to carry a truth alone for longer than was fair, or if you have ever had to decide whether someone was worth the risk of being found, share it with someone who needs to remember that it is never too late to come back to the place that was always yours.